1 minute ago has shattered Westminster tonight. In an unprecedented ruling that no one saw coming, the United Kingdom Supreme Court has delivered a political earthquake, forcing Prime Minister Keir Starmer out of office. The courtroom erupted as the verdict was read, declaring that Starmer had violated constitutional boundaries and acted beyond the lawful authority of Parliament. Gasps filled the chamber, and reporters outside captured scenes of sheer disbelief. For the first time in modern British history, a sitting Prime Minister has been ordered to vacate his position by the nation's highest court. The crowd outside the Supreme Court building began chanting, some in anger, some in celebration, the air thick with tension and confusion. Britain has entered uncharted territory. Within minutes, the story dominated every news channel, every social feed, every conversation. The words Starmer removed flashed across the BBC ticker like a thunderclap through the night Downing Street. Once a symbol of control and command turned into a fortress under siege. Police sealed off the area as advisors and aides rushed in and out in a frenzy. Insiders reported panic behind closed doors, staff shredding papers, phones ringing off the hook, and cabinet members vanishing from meetings. It was chaos at the highest level of government, and the entire nation watched it unfold live. The court's ruling stemmed from Starmer's controversial decision to bypass Parliament over an emergency economic bill, a move critics called a silent coup. According to legal documents unsealed this morning, Starmer had approved a sweeping executive order granting the Treasury unchecked powers to redirect billions in public funds without a Commons vote. It was supposed to be a temporary measure, but the Supreme Court saw it differently. Chief Justice Alexander Reed stated that Starmer's order undermined the democratic process and defied constitutional limits. In short, the Prime Minister had crossed a line that no one in his position was ever meant to cross. As the ruling was announced, an eerie silence fell over the Labour benches. Senior ministers stared blankly, some whispering, others visibly trembling. Starmer himself reportedly remained expressionless, leaning forward slightly as the words, "You must resign," echoed through the chamber. Moments later, his security detail quietly ushered him out at the side door, avoiding cameras and protesters gathering at the entrance. It was the image of a fallen leader, not defeated at the ballot box but struck down by the law itself. Outside, the atmosphere turned electric. Supporters of the ruling called it a victory for democracy, claiming the court had saved Britain from authoritarian overreach, but Starmer's allies cried foul, insisting it was a judicial coup and accusing the Supreme Court of overstepping its authority. The divide was instant, deep and explosive. Protesters clashed on the streets of London. One side shouted, "Justice has spoken," while the other screamed, "Democracy is dead." Parliament Square became a battlefield of banners and voices. The government was collapsing in real time, and no one seemed to know what would happen next. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace remained silent, but sources close to the royal household confirmed that King Charles had been briefed. Within the hour, rumours began swirling of an emergency audience being called at Windsor Castle. Some insiders claimed the king was deeply disturbed by Starmer's actions and the constitutional chaos that followed. Others said he was preparing a royal statement that could determine the fate of the government itself. Across Britain, people waited anxiously for the King's word, as if the entire nation's balance rested on his next move. In the opposition ranks, Reform UK's Richard Tice wasted no time taking to the airwaves. "This is the beginning of accountability," he declared. Starmer thought he was untouchable, but no one is above the Constitution. His words went viral within minutes, fueling calls for a snap general election. At the same time, Nigel Farage weighed in on GB News, saying bluntly, "This isn't the end of a Prime Minister, it's the end of a regime." The statement sent shockwaves through Westminster, adding fuel to an already uncontrollable political fire. By nightfall, Downing Street's gates were lined with journalists, police, and chanting crowds. The once commanding voice of Keir Starmer had gone silent. Cabinet ministers were reportedly holding emergency talks to decide who would assume interim leadership. Rumours of betrayal filled the corridors. Whispers that some within Labour had cooperated with the court behind the scenes, quietly feeding evidence to the judges to ensure Starmer's downfall. If true, it would mean the Prime Minister wasn't just defeated by law, he was betrayed by his own party. The chaos extended beyond politics. Markets plunged overnight, the pound dropping as traders panicked over uncertainty. European leaders issued cautious statements while Washington remained silent. Across the Atlantic, Donald Trump posted a cryptic message on X: when power ignores law, law always wins. The post racked up millions of views, sending British media into a frenzy. The message was clear: the world was watching the UK's political collapse unfold like a live thriller. As dawn approached, the question tearing through the nation was no longer whether Starmer would go, it was who would replace him and whether Britain's fragile democracy could survive what had just happened. In pubs, living rooms and studios, people whispered that this could mark the end of Labour's rule and possibly the beginning of something far darker or far freer. As the dust from the Supreme Court's ruling settled, Britain found itself gripped by something more sinister than political collapse. A hidden war for power that had been brewing in silence for months. Behind the polished smiles and scripted interviews, factions within Labour, the monarchy, and the judiciary had been quietly manoeuvring, each playing their own dangerous game. What looked like justice on the surface was, in truth, the final blow in a silent conflict that had raged unseen through the highest corridors of power. Sources close to Parliament whispered that Starmer's downfall didn't begin in the courtroom. It began in his own cabinet. For weeks, senior ministers had grown restless, alarmed by his obsession with centralising authority. When Starmer moved to push the Emergency Economic Powers Act without parliamentary approval, it was the last straw. Ministers who once swore loyalty now feared for their own political survival. One insider leaked that several had begun discreetly consulting constitutional experts and judges, laying the groundwork for a legal rebellion that would later explode in public. It wasn't just a legal case, it was a political assassination wrapped in legality. By the time the Supreme Court convened, the machinery of betrayal was already in motion. Former allies like Rachel Reeves and David Lammy reportedly distanced themselves from Starmer's decision-making, crafting statements that could protect their reputations if the situation turned toxic. Behind closed doors, messages were exchanged, back-channel meetings held, and secret assurances made. Senior civil servants allegedly fed documents to the judiciary detailing Starmer's internal directives. Memos that proved he had overridden both Treasury protocol and parliamentary consent. When the judges saw the evidence, there was no going back. Meanwhile, Buckingham Palace maintained its usual air of neutrality, or so it appeared. But Palace aides later revealed that King Charles had been quietly briefed for weeks about constitutional irregularities within the Prime Minister's office. His advisers had warned him that Starmer's actions risked a direct confrontation between the government and the monarchy, a line no Prime Minister had dared cross in the modern era. When the ruling came down, the King's response was said to be cold, deliberate, and absolute. He called an emergency meeting with the Privy Council, insisting that constitutional order must prevail. That phrase, subtle yet loaded, was seen by many as the royal green light that sealed Starmer's fate. The opposition, smelling blood in the water, pounced instantly. Nigel Farage declared that the people have reclaimed sovereignty, while Richard Tice claimed Reform UK was ready to restore integrity to a government that had lost its moral compass. The Conservative benches, fractured but opportunistic, began pushing for a caretaker administration until new elections could be called. For the first time in decades, all political parties were united by one emotion: fear. Fear of the vacuum left behind by the collapse of Labour's leadership, fear of what could come next. Outside the walls of power, Britain itself was unravelling. Overnight, riots broke out in Manchester, Birmingham and parts of East London as protesters clashed with police. Labour supporters accused the judiciary of staging a coup. Anti-Labour demonstrators called it the day democracy was saved. Fireworks and flames lit the night skies in equal measure, and the world watched in stunned disbelief as Britain, once seen as the cradle of constitutional order, descended into scenes of division unseen since the Brexit fallout. Inside Number 10, Chaos turned to despair. Starmer's aides began packing their offices, shredding classified papers and erasing communications. Staffers were reportedly ordered to leave personal devices behind. An eerie silence settled over the Prime Minister's office, the hum of computers replaced by the echo of footsteps on marble floors. Even the security guards stood unsure, not knowing whether they were still protecting a sitting Prime Minister or guarding a political ghost. In a single night, Starmer went from commanding the nation to being politically homeless. But amid the panic, a new narrative began taking shape. One far more dangerous than any scandal. Rumours emerged of a secret alliance between senior judges and certain figures close to the palace. Some claimed this was not justice, but a quiet restoration of royal influence, a reminder that ultimate authority in Britain still rested not in Parliament, but in the Crown. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Hashtags like hashtag judicial coup and hashtag palace power trended across platforms. For millions of ordinary Britons, trust in the system evaporated overnight. Then came the leaks. A classified memo surfaced on an encrypted journalist network allegedly written by a senior civil servant inside the Cabinet Office. The document suggested that the Supreme Court's investigation had begun months before the public knew, possibly triggered by intelligence briefings from MI5, warning that Starmer's policies threatened constitutional balance. If true, that would mean Britain's own security agencies had played a role in the Prime Minister's downfall. The revelation sent Westminster into paralysis. How deep did this go? Who was really pulling the strings? As reporters pressed for answers, no one in power seemed willing to speak. The Supreme Court refused to comment. Downing Street offered no statement. Buckingham Palace released only 6 words. The King respects judicial independence completely. Yet those words carried a subtle undertone, one that sounded less like neutrality and more like finality. It was as if the monarchy itself was quietly reclaiming its place in the nation's hierarchy, reminding everyone that while governments may rise and fall, the crown endures. As the night deepened, an unmarked convoy was seen leaving Downing Street under heavy escort. Some claim Starmer was inside being transported to a private location under police protection. Others whispered that he was en route to Buckingham Palace for one final meeting with the King, a conversation that could decide the future of the Labour Party and perhaps the entire political order of Britain. By sunrise, Britain awoke to a nation without a Prime Minister. Starmer was gone, and no one knew where he was. The country stood frozen between disbelief and unrest. Outside Westminster, the air was cold and electric, the smell of smoke still hanging from the night's protests. The gates of Downing Street were locked, guarded by armed officers with unreadable faces. Inside, empty corridors echoed with the remnants of power, half-drunk cups of tea, piles of unsigned documents, and the ghost of authority that had vanished overnight. The machinery of government had stopped, and the heart of Britain was beating irregularly. Buckingham Palace remained silent. The palace refused to confirm or deny whether Starmer had been summoned for a private audience, but insiders spoke of a tense night behind closed doors, of phone calls with senior judges, handwritten notes exchanged between courtiers and ministers, and one solemn declaration by the monarch: Britain must endure. No one knew what he meant by those words. Some believed it was a call for calm. Others believed it was a warning that the chaos unfolding was only the beginning of something much larger.